Good evening, America, and welcome to the Monday edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you, as always, from the nation's capital, and of course, the wiredtofishcoffee.com studios. You know this Wired to Fish coffee is my favorite coffee pack. It's such much favorite. I actually took it on my trip this past week. Loved it at every stop. You can do the same thing. Go right now to wiredtofishcoffee.com. Get a fantastic 10% discount on their smooth tasting coffees and their great mugs and other gifts, including fishing ornaments. All you have to do is use the promo code JUSTNEWS at checkout. All right, for years, the scourge of anti-Semitism has infected our country, especially our college campuses, with ugly protests, ugly words of hatred, jaw-dropping episodes of intolerance. But now, twice in 2 weeks, hatred of Jews has manifested itself in stunning and heinous crimes, true violence. First, it was two young Israeli embassy workers gunned down outside a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C. by a man who was yelling Free Palestine. Now an Egyptian man named Mohammed Sabri Soliman, who was illegally in the country, by the way, after overstaying his visa. He's charged with 16 state counts of attempted murder in Colorado and one federal hate crime for trying to burn to death 12 victims with Molotov cocktails. He, too, was also allegedly yelling in support of Palestine. What were those 12 victims doing? They were simply attending a vigil for Israeli hostages in Gaza. That's all they were doing. We're going to delve deeper into this mindless violence and the searing hatred that is rearing its head in our country right now, and what is going to be done about it all throughout the show today. Also, in an exclusive you can go read about on justthenews.com, the FBI has launched a sprawling investigation into possible criminal cover-ups that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. We've learned that the FBI is zeroing in on three separate plots. They are the origins of the virus itself. Did they try to hide the fact that it came from the Wuhan lab that got federal funding? Are they trying to hide or destroy federal records in federal agencies so that Congress and the public couldn't see what was going on? And the third plot was their manipulation of the vaccine approval process and its subsequent side effects, particularly those heart inflammations we've been talking about. It's all being done by agents in three cities, FBI agents in Cleveland, New York, and Baltimore, leading those three investigations. Officials told Just the News that the possibility of illegal conduct in the matter is being significantly investigated. In fact, charges and arrests could be made in just a few short weeks. So a pretty big deal. We're going to keep you up to speed on all of those things over at justthenews.com. Now, a good opportunity to turn to my amazing co-host, Amanda Head. A lot of other news today, Amanda.
A lot, yes. In fact, I wanted to touch on a little bit more of the Boulder attacks, those horrific attacks that took place yesterday, because everything that's being reported points to a motive, as you pointed out, as evidenced by the attacker allegedly saying that he wanted to kill all Zionist people, as well as the report that he yelled Free Palestine during the attack. The FBI came out and said as much after the attack, labeling it a targeted terror attack against people attending a pro-Israel rally there in Boulder. However, CNN thought a little bit differently about it, and they called out the FBI for labeling it so quickly instead of reporting on the attack, I suppose. Check it out.
Maybe it's not, and he has no incentive to get it wrong. So we're going to take a step back, not be responsive to tweets by two heads of the FBI who don't have a long history in local law enforcement, and we will wait and hope it isn't what we all worry it is. And if it is, then there'll be an investigation. But that's like nothing I'd ever seen before. You normally, actually, Andrew knows this, you normally get the local people getting way ahead on motive and the FBI saying, we don't have it yet. You now have the opposite here. And until we know that the victims were members of that of the Jewish event, we don't have the nexus. And I will believe the Denver police chief that they do not have that nexus now. And if they do, I will be the first one out here saying that that is a hate crime. But until we do, we all need to not follow the FBI's tweets.
Okay, we've got. I mean, generally, it is good to wait until we know all of the facts before reporting on something. But unfortunately, that's not really something that the media does anymore. We've all seen them jump to the gun on numerous supposed hate crimes in the past. But this time, that's when they questioned the FBI for labeling the attack in Boulder, Colorado, an act of terror. John, give me a break.
Listen, by the time Kash Patel made those pronouncements and Dan Bongino made them on, they already knew that the man said he was trying to kill Zionists, and that he had shouted Free Palestine, and that several of the victims were attendees at this vigil as opposed to just members on the street. So they weren't acting, out of character, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, we got a great first guest to kick us off today. She represents the great state of Iowa in the United States House of Representatives. She is Congresswoman Marinette Miller-Meeks. Congresswoman, great to have you on the show.
Great to be with both of you, and I could not agree with you more. The FBI did not act rashly. As a matter of fact, their quick actions and quick summary has been in contrast to people allowing things to go on, which is why we have seen the dramatic rise in anti-Semitism, and why it seems that it's almost tolerated in the United States, and it should not be. So I think that they called it like it was, especially as you mentioned 2 weeks ago, a young couple being murdered just outside the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., just like we saw for the past 2 years since October of 2023, with the rise in anti-Semitism on college campuses, but yet the president's not doing anything and then being ousted. So I think it's very appropriate that that the FBI call this out. And remember that the FBI didn't even call out domestic terrorism in the shooting of Majority Leader Steve Scalise in 2017. And that was left-wing domestic terrorism, which when I was in Homeland Security, they weren't even calling that domestic terrorism.
Yeah, deja vu all over again. Congresswoman, I want to ask a little bit about this boiling teapot that we have. You've got these an entire generation of young people here whose minds have been poisoned in the academic world to hate Jews and to think that Palestinians are victims of a genocide. And then you have all of these people that came in the country, some illegally, some overstaying their visa, allegedly, as this man did. And all of them have this same sort of hatred working together. It seems like we have a national crisis underway.
I think that there is a national crisis, and the first thing to address that is one, to acknowledge that you have a crisis, to acknowledge that it exists instead of just passing it off, blowing it off, as we have seen some individuals do. When you have students that can't get to their classroom, aren't allowed to pass onto a campus for which they are paying tuition, where they feel unsafe and unwanted. I mean, that isn't underscores what's happened. We had shootings at Jewish synagogues. We had a stabbing of a rabbi in Detroit coming home from a synagogue. So this has definitely been on the rise, and we have to acknowledge it, and then we have to start addressing it. To that end, I have a bill to set up an anti-Semitism commission to study this, so that then we can make recommendations, work with local law enforcement, work with community areas, find out what's being taught to children. And that includes in religious facilities, in schools, in higher education, what exactly is being taught.
Wow,
Congresswoman, and it also feels like they are a drag on the Democrat Party, because you have more senior members of the Democrat Party who I think support Israel and support Jews in this country and hate to see this happening to them. But you have this younger faction of their party who is pulling them down. How do those more senior Democrats find a way to not turn off those younger voters and at the same time protect these people who have been a large part of their constituency for a long time?
Well, one of the first things they did was in their convention, I think that was 12 years ago, remove God from their platform as a nod to those of the Islamic faith, which I believe for the majority of those who practice the Islamic faith, they're people that are of peace. But we know that there is a radical jihadist Islamic contention. And so, they've done things that have coddled these individuals. And it's at the point there are wonderful members of Congress, Representative Wasserman Schultz, Brad Schneider, and others that, I won't go into all of them, but there are many members on both sides of the aisle, bipartisan support for Israel, who do not see Israel as, the purveyor of this violence. They haven't been in Palestine since 2000 or Gaza since 2005. They were attacked on October 7th of 2023. They are not responsible for these actions. And there is hatred and a desire by these individuals to destroy Israel and the Jewish people. So I think acknowledging it, acting upon it, and we have a bipartisan group of people who I know want to do that. But the Democrat Party is going to have to come to terms with that within their own factions, because as you said, they have young people wanting to primary people that have been in Congress who may feel differently than them, but they're going to have to come to terms with this within their own party, this fracture, which, as we have already seen, is leading to violence.
Congresswoman, there's another problem that seems to be rearing its head, and that is a significant amount of espionage among our own ranks in the military and the DIA. We had a couple soldiers last week, a DIA official this week. Before that, a CIA official. It seems like during the Biden years, a lot of spies began getting recruited or certainly got active for foreign countries. How serious is it, and are there some good countermeasures underway? Are you satisfied where the FBI is now and rolling up some of these spies?
I think it is a very serious issue, and there used to be severe punishments for this type of activity, even lesser than this. Having been in the military, both active duty and reserve, and my husband, 30 years in the military, we're continually taught all of our training about being careful about people addressing you, coming to you, wanting to interact with you. We've had to take actions with the select subcommittee on the Chinese Communist Party. We've had to take actions on, outreach and ingresses into both our universities, into our military, into our institutions within the federal government. It is a very important issue. We've had to take action on preventing the Chinese Communist Party from buying farmland, especially farmland that's near our military bases. And let us not forget, a Chinese spy balloon that was allowed to go all the way across the United States, and it wasn't shot down until it went all the way across the United States. Meanwhile, recording, sending information in real time, going across sensitive military bases, nuclear silos. That was unconscionable that this was allowed to be perpetuated during the Biden administration. And I think the Trump administration, Kash Patel and the FBI, they are going through this. They're going to weed this out and put our agencies back on what their mission is, which is to protect the people of the United States and the United States.
Congresswoman, I think that there is some type of subtle connection between anti-Semitism and the loss of faith in this country and the loss of patriotism in this country. But you served our country in the United States Army for 2.5 decades, and we have the 250th birthday of it coming up in a few weeks. There's going to be a parade, a lot of fanfare surrounding it. Is that possibly a way to inspire young people and move things back in the direction of patriotism?
I think that it is to acknowledge what's happening, to have this educational moment, if you will, in TV and media coverage. But then the other thing that I see as helping has been, the work. I had my first bill on school choice with Senator Tim Scott in 2021, my first year I came into Congress. So I think school choice, having educational opportunities, is also going to help with that. So I see, parents, how they raise their children, where they go to school, what's taught in school is going to help as well. But the focus on the 250th anniversary, focus on, how we're training our military, what's happening within our national intelligence agencies and FBI, all of those things are going to help to, reinvigorate this sense of pride in America. We know that our flag and our Constitution stand for values. While we may be imperfect, we are always striving for protection and to live up to the values of our Constitution and our flag.
Yeah, so very, very important. And Flag Day just ahead.
That's right.
So very important.
Yeah, June 14th.
It's hard to believe. Congresswoman, we're going to be watching that bill closely. It seems like the perfect bipartisan opportunity for people to stand up against anti-Semitism and this senseless violence with that commission. Thanks for joining us today and giving us such an important update.
Thank you all so much for covering this important topic.
Good to have you on. Thanks so much. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, more on that heinous attack in Israel and what the FBI will likely be doing over the next several weeks to piece it together. Who is behind it? Who are other people likely to commit such violence? We'll have all that with the former Executive Assistant Director of the FBI, Chris Vajota, right after these messages. Hey folks, if you're a homeowner like me, you need to listen to this. In today's AI and cyber world, scammers are stealing home titles and your equity is their target. Here's how it works. Criminals forge your signature on one document, use a fake notary stamp, pay a small fee with your county, and boom, just like that, your home title has been transferred out of your name. And that's when the problems begin, because they start taking out loans using your equity and even sell your property. And you're not even going to find out it's happened until you get a collection or foreclosure notice months later. That's a nightmare, right? So when's the last time you checked on your home title? Well, if you're like me, the answer is never, right? You need to do something about that right now. That's why I've partnered with Home Title Lock, so you can find out today if you're already a victim. Use my promo code JTN at HometitleLock.com, and you'll get a free title history report and a free trial of their $1 million triple lock protection. That's 24/7 monitoring of your title, urgent alerts to any changes that might happen, and if fraud does happen, they'll spend up to $1 million to fix it. That's a good deal. Find out why I trust Home Title Lock. Go to HometitleLock.com and use the promo code JTN. That's HometitleLock.com, promo code JTN.
Welcome back, everybody. During a rally in support of the release of Israeli hostages in Boulder, Colorado this weekend, a 45-year-old Egyptian national, Mohammed Suleiman, reportedly used makeshift flamethrowers and Molotov cocktails. He injured 8, including a Holocaust survivor. He was also reported by witnesses to be yelling "Free Palestine." So we now have 2 attacks against Jews in 2 weeks here in the United States. Is this the start of a disturbing trend? And what can the FBI do about it? Joining us now, retired FBI Executive Assistant Director and the author of the book Wanted, the FBI I Once Knew, one of my favorite books on the topic, Chris Pajota. Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to visit with you and your audience.
Likewise. And, I think back to the Biden administration when we were dealing with such border crises, and I remember there were a number of law enforcement agencies, FBI included, who issued bolos for military-age males coming across the southern border. It seems to me that there is an opportunity here for bolos on these types of attacks because so many of them are turning violent and edging up against terrorism.
Well, what we're looking at here is the threat environment that the previous administration allowed to form and evolve and intensify in our nation. So now we're starting to see some of the ripple effects of those, I would say, flawed policies and practices when they basically shut down our border security. Putting out the alerts to our communities is one part of the equation. The other part is starting to knit together the government systems that for this individual would show more clearly and timely that he was an overstay on his immigration authority.
Yeah, and that's a big piece of this and a concerning piece of it because there's a lot of other folks that fall into that category during the Biden years. This was sort of a storm that's been brewing for a long time, Chris, and I know even when you were back in the FBI, just a few short years ago, you were seeing this rise of anti-Semitism. You got this sort of foreign component that's stirring it and sometimes sending people in, and then you got these incubating labs of college campuses where the hatred is spreading. Right. How do we start to put this back in the box? How do we start to combat this successfully?
Well, I think we have to acknowledge it. First of all, I think there's a large part of our society that won't acknowledge that we are witnessing a shift in world power structures as well as waves of ideological change, leftism. You're looking at Marxism, neo-Marxism, and other, I would say, political / religious views that are moving into the Western societies, and they're asserting themselves in our societies. And until we acknowledge it, it'll be hard to start resolving some of these possible hazards or threats that are being posed by these, I would say, adversarial ideologies to what we have in the United States and parts of Europe.
Yeah. So important.
And a lot of this anti-Semitism, this hatred is brewing on college campuses, but a lot of these kids are not college graduates or even attendees. But you see these conversations, these radical statements, these threats of violence percolating on social media. Is there an opportunity there for the FBI to maybe deploy more efforts in examining social media posts to prevent some of these things?
I think you can. I think you have to measure that type of action against, of course, the free speech that makes our nation great, right? You have to look at what is protected speech versus what is inflammatory speech that could move people from ideological opposition to violence and action. So I think the FBI's position, yes, you can monitor certain threatening language online. However, I think what the FBI has to do is start engaging with these universities and informing them of the threat environment and the possible negative outcomes of allowing some of these ideologies to form on their campuses and be protected on these campuses and then move that out into the communities and result possibly in acts of violence like we've seen over the past couple days and weeks.
So important, that contact and that message to be spread. Chris, I know in an investigation like this, the next phase of it, now that we sort of have the first suspect involved, is who else was he in contact? Who else might have been encouraging,
Right.
funding, pushing him, looking for similarities in that funding trail? What does the FBI do over the next 5 to 10 days to check all those leads?
Well, they're going to start looking into this individual's lives. They're going to, of course, have very basic investigative work, friends, family, associates. They're going to look at all of his social media. They'll search his living area. They'll look for all of his car, electronics. I mean, all of these things. They're going to try to build a pattern of life and look at the reason that he moved from his ideology to action. They're going to see what was a triggering event, and they're also going to look to see if he's part of any larger network of people who may hold similar views or may be close to taking violent action based upon, again, religious or political ideologies. So that's where they're going to be looking, but they're also going to go into, in addition to investigative work, they're going to go into prevent mode. They're going to start working with some of the communities that are at risk, and they're going to start helping them bolster security practices, awareness, and just kind of community welfare discussions. So the FBI has a multi-layered approach on this. We've done it for years, and it's nothing new to the FBI. This is something that now that they're no longer distracted with some other peripheral issues, they're very good at this, and they'll engage the proper communities and make sure that everybody stays safe.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm curious if you think the FBI needs to possibly be deploying more agents, or if that comes in the form of some type of taxpayer funded security. But these synagogues already have their own security. Many of them, unfortunately,
Right.
have had need for it for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. They have their own security. They're very good at what they do. The communities are very tight knit on those issues. When I was out in the field and when I ran field offices, we had very close contact with the Jewish community, and mostly they take care of their own security needs. We help them with awareness mostly. We help them with threat environment awareness, any kind of immediate or incoming threats. And we also make sure that they have clear lines of communication with the FBI and with our state and local law enforcement partners. So again, layered problem set, but the FBI is very good at this, and we have great relationships in most of the communities that we do business in.
Yeah, great point. Chris, we had a story this morning looking at a sprawling investigation of the FBI into 3 possible COVID cover-ups, and it starts with something very important. The FBI was the first and most correct when it came to assessing that the COVID-19 vaccine most likely came out of the Wuhan lab, where there was some federal funded research, dangerous research going on. Now they're looking at 3 things. Were there scientists? Were there foreigners? Were there people in the pharmaceutical industry or other private industries who were trying to cover up different elements of this pandemic, from the origins to its human-human transmissibility to problems with the vaccine? It's pretty rare, pretty large investigation. Your thoughts on what might be going on behind the scenes?
I think right now what you're looking at is a national platform investigation, as we used to call it, where you have several field offices are going to take different parts of very large investigative approaches. And as you broke it down into those 3 areas, you'll have those 3 offices that'll each take an area, because they're very broad and broad investigative areas, right? And what they'll do is they'll issue investigative leads to other field offices as the investigative effort matures and we start looking more deeply into things. And they're going to see, basically, were any laws broken? How are the ethics of these situations used to possibly, make decisions or substitute political views for proper decision making? And maybe not, they weren't looking out for the welfare and well-being of the American people so much as to support their own political beliefs or possibly, profit-driven motives. So the FBI is going to look into those things, and then with the Department of Justice, see where there could possibly be some corrective action taken or possibly some legal action.
Chris, real quick, we got a minute left. There's another headline in this, and it comes right out of your book. You were one of the biggest advocates of returning these investigations to field offices, getting headquarters out of the meddling. That's what's happened
Yes,
here.
sir.
You got Cleveland, New York, Baltimore. A good sign that the new leadership is following the playbook that you like?
That's correct, sir. Let the field offices do the investigative work. Step back, watch them work the FBI magic that the FBI was once known for, and we're going to be in good shape.
Yeah, just
And
as you
speaking of
recommended.
that book, Wanted, the FBI, I once knew John and I both have read it and absolutely
one of
love
my
it.
favorites.
Chris Biota,
Yeah.
thank you so
very
much for
much.
being here. Great to see you, my friend.
Yeah.
Pleasure. Have a great night.
You too. All right, everybody. Up next, Oklahoma State Superintendent Ryan Walters is going to be here to discuss his latest, quote, scandal, teaching about the 2020 election in schools. Stay with us.
Hey, it's a new day in America and a new administration in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of excitement and optimism about the future, but the reality is there's a lot of work to do as well, especially when it comes to fixing our broken healthcare system. The truth is that the forces that are responsible for breaking our healthcare system aren't going to simply go away. The challenges our system faces won't disappear overnight. Now more than ever, you need to be prepared. That's where the Wellness Company comes in. Their doctors are medical professionals that you can trust, and their line of prescription medical kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy, as well as your family. Whether it's the medical emergency kit, the contagion kit, the first aid kit, or the travel kit, these prescription kits contain an assortment of life-saving medications and guidebooks to assist in the proper use of these medications. From the flu to strep throat, from COVID to the bird flu, from a trip to the beach to a trip overseas, the Wellness Company has a prescription kit designed to keep you and your family safe. Make America healthy again. Start at home. Do your part and protect the health of you and your family. Go to twc.health/justnews today and order. That's twc.health/justnews and use the promo code JUSTNEWS to save 10% off. Welcome back, America. When our founding fathers were creating this beautiful country nearly 250 years ago, they intended the states to be the laboratories for the best ideas. And when it comes to education, there is one state that stands out. Oklahoma is on the forefront of some of the biggest reforms in education, led by Governor Kevin Stitt. And our next guest, the Oklahoma State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ryan Walters. Mr. Superintendent, good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, I want to start with the big news that happened last week. The Supreme Court deadlocked 4-4 on the issue of a faith-based charter school. That leaves a lot of flexibility for your state to try to find maybe a workaround or a solution. Tell us what's going on behind the scenes in your state right now.
Absolutely. Well, first thing is obviously, a lot of parents, myself included, disappointed here in the ruling. We were really hoping Amy Coney Barrett was going to be a voting member here, and we felt very confident in that majority there. But she recused herself, so we got a 4-4 tie, which kicks it back down, which means the charter school can't move forward. But it's not a definitive ruling, so we can bring the case back up. We're looking at our options here from the State Department of Education. We're going to continue to fight for parents. We're going to continue to fight for their religious liberties, and we're going to continue to fight for school choice. And unfortunately, the only people celebrating this are our Attorney General, Gittner Drummond, atheists, Satanists, the teachers union. They're out crowing about this, but the reality is this isn't over. We're not going to stop our fight for religious liberty and parents in the state of Oklahoma. So you'll be hearing from us soon, and we'll continue to move the ball forward, leading the charge for religious liberty and school choice.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to think of the argument against this. What was the dissenting opinion in a nutshell?
Well, in a nutshell, they just basically said that they wanted to not allow the Catholic Church, Christian churches to do this because they felt like there was a separation of, a church and state issue, which isn't in the Declaration of Independence, isn't in the Constitution. Again, what we said was they met all the criteria of a charter school. Telling them they can't do it because they are religious violates their right to express their religious beliefs. Again, they met every criteria. There was zero issue in the way they were going to run the school and the way they were going to start the school. But our local Supreme Court here in Oklahoma got this dead wrong. They stepped out and said, I know, but you are Christian, so we can't take your application. That flies in the face of the Constitution. So look, the justices on the other side got it dead wrong here. I think this is a fundamental issue of you're seeing the states, you're seeing the federal government, the state government weaponizing itself against Christians for far too long. We've got to correct that and say, Christians, absolutely, we want you to be involved in our kids' education. Parents, absolutely, we want you to decide for your kids where they go to school. And again, we've got a lot of great schools across the country that are Catholic, that are Christian, that do a great job. We want our parents to be able to choose those options as well.
Yeah, so important. There are many huge reforms that you have been able to enact in your role as the chief of the public school system. Among them, some new curriculum standards. Tell us how those are going and what the impact has been for parents and children downstream in the school system.
Well, I'm telling you, the left has been losing their minds over this one, and I love it. I mean, it's one of my favorite things that we've been able to do, which is we went in and we looked at our history standards. You know, I heard this all over the state of Oklahoma when I ran for office. Why don't our kids know more about America? Why don't they know more about American history? You know, they know that Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner, but they don't know he was the author of the Declaration of Independence. They don't know all of the prolific writings of the founders. They don't know about the Federalist Papers. So we came in and I said, we're going to rewrite our history standards, and we're going to make sure that our kids have an understanding of those fundamental principles that make America the greatest country in the history of the world. And we're unapologetic about that. We want our kids to be patriotic. We want our kids to love this country. We want them to understand where this country's values came from. So we took it on. We increased the standards dramatically. We put the Bible back in. We said, listen, kids have to understand the role the Bible played in American history. My goodness, every founding father cited it. Every president has cited it. They got to understand that context. We went through and said they've got to understand more about the founding. They got to know all the Federalist Papers. They've got to know about the Declaration of Independence. They need to read the letters that all these prolific Americans wrote time and time again. And we also said, listen, absolutely, we've got to go all the way up to 2020 election. And we want critical thinkers. So we want them to dig into the election, look at the information, look at the data, look at the charts, come to their own conclusion. But we want them to study things. We want them to not be pushed by a left-wing media agenda, but instead be critical thinkers. That shouldn't be a left or right issue. It should be common sense. But boy, our leftist folks out there are losing their mind over this one.
They are. At some point in the last 40 years, things went awry with education with respect to actually teaching history. And I feel like it's right about the time they went from teaching history to renaming it social studies. Now, they said social studies is the same thing as history, but it's really not. And most school systems across this country are still teaching social studies, right?
That's right. And you're so right on this of we've got to get back to history is history. It's what happened, okay? And you study those facts. Remember, I'm a former history teacher, so I'm getting real passionate about this. But history is understanding what happened before you. So one, you can see what worked, what was successful, what are traits you want to have as an individual, what are traits that the country should pursue. And also there's the bad examples that teach you things not to do. You learn from history. Winston Churchill said the further back you look is the further ahead you can also see. So you've got to be able to understand history, not as a science, but as what were the events, how did they happen, not through the lens of critical race theory, not through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but just what's historically accurate. And then use that to formulate your own thought process, your own identity, your own views of the country, your own views of the future. And again, we can never be unified as Americans. We can never be unified in purpose and goals if we don't know where we came from. And I think that's why the left hates it so much, is they thrive on turning Americans against each other. They thrive on the most divisive ideologies the country's ever seen, when frankly, conservatives are saying, if we go back to the founding and we really study it, it's a central point we can all start with. So even when we have our differences, we have this similar belief in the founding, the core principles of America. That's really what brings people together.
Yeah. So real quickly, you got about a minute left. There's a little brouhaha in the legacy media over some of the things that are in the current curriculum about teaching about the 2020 election, about where COVID, the virus came from. Tell us a little bit what your thinking was and answer some of those critics.
Absolutely. I went on, unfortunately, I went on MSNBC a couple of weeks ago, and they were just, we can't believe you reported this and that, or this is in here. I said, well, y'all reported that. I mean, y'all are now trying to go back and gaslight and say there wasn't a record amount of mail-in ballots. Well, of course, that's a fact. Oh, you try to go back and say, well, we don't know where COVID originated from. The FBI and CIA have released that. We know it came from a lab in Wuhan. We know that there were obviously a lot of concerns around the country around mail-in ballots. How do I know that? Well, because 36 states passed voter integrity laws afterwards to correct that. So what we're doing is presenting the facts to students. We want them to do a deep dive. We want them to come to their own conclusions. What we're not going to do is say, we're going to take a New York Times headline, and that's going to be all that they study on the 2020 election. No, we're going to say, listen, look at all the data, look at all the information. We want you to see. Obviously, there were a lot of voters that voted there that didn't vote in the future, right? So how many mail-in ballots were there? From what counties? What were the swings there? And we want kids to analyze elections. I think that's the only truthful way to cover this.
Yeah, critical thinking, which is something all of us should come out of schools prepared to do. Superintendent, always a great honor to have you on. We always learn so much. There's so many things going on in your great state, but a great honor to have you on today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys very much. Appreciate you.
Great conversation. You too. All right, folks, a quick commercial break around the corner, but then we're going to talk about the story of weaponized justice, this one involving an Emmy Award-winning actress and her NYPD sergeant husband. Can't wait for that one. We'll have that right after these messages.
Welcome back, everybody. I want to highlight an important story that I recently shared on my podcast. It is about, of course, the weaponized justice system, and it's not just President Trump who has had to deal with it. For example, Emmy Award-winning actress Martha Byrne and her husband, NYPD Sergeant Michael McMahon, have allegedly had it happen to them under the former Biden regime. It's a pretty crazy story, and I want to bring on Martha to get her side of it. She has written a book all about it, too, entitled In Interest of Justice, and it's out on June 5th. Martha, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to see you, and I'm a huge fan. I've been following you for years, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We are so happy to have you here, and I'm very sorry for what your husband is going through. Give everybody just kind of a rundown of everything that has transpired.
So my husband was a retired sergeant, NYPD sergeant. He was very successful in his career on the NYPD. He had 1,000 arrests, 78 medals, and he was in the Bronx and suffered a severe car accident on the job, became a private investigator, and had a very successful career. He worked for the Vatican. He worked for presidential candidates. He had a great career. And he got a routine call in 2016 from a translation company in Queens. And her client was looking for somebody to find some assets, do some surveillance, and basically that was it, some asset searches. And he hired 2 NYPD retired detectives who were PIs to work with him on this case. And he spoke to 2 federal agents about the case back in 2016. It was a civil matter. Never thought about it again. He notified local police even when he was doing the surveillance and did reports, and just moved on with his life. And as I said, had this incredible career as a private investigator. He actually even did security for the Parkland shooting survivors, the kids around the country. He was a sought after PI. Didn't think about it. He had made a few $1,000s on that case in 2016. And then on October 28th, 2020, a pre-dawn raid at our house, which is still horrifying to this day that it even happened. And they arrested him for violating FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and interstate stalking. Now, it should be noted that the subjects of his surveillance never saw him. They never filed a police report. They had no photographs. They had no license plate, no description of the drivers. They never saw him or the other 2 private investigators either. And he was charged for a federal crime for doing his job as a private investigator. He didn't break any law. It was shocking. And as a Foreign Agent Registration Act, he was hired by a New York company. So there was no foreign government connection. So of course he's like, this is crazy. Like something's wrong here. They must have made a mistake. And we went through all his emails. He saved everything. He had every text message, email. He had saved every invoice, everything. Every penny was accounted for. He goes, what's going on here? I have to fight back. This must be a mistake. And we went to trial in 2023 of June. He was arrested in October of 2020. And we were absolutely horrified, not just the fact that from the criminal complaint out of the Newark FBI office, the amount of false information in that criminal complaint was outrageous. I mean, absolutely outrageous, literally making up scenarios that he had nothing to do with. We couldn't believe it. Like, he's like, this has got to be a mistake. And those lies continued to trial. Even we had proven that they were false, and they continued to lie. And, you know, he was found not guilty of count 1, which was the major count, which was violating FARA conspiracy, which that means you were with a foreign government. So they couldn't prove that he had been in connection with a foreign government, because we found out and learned through our own investigation that he was recommended for this job by a former U.S. attorney. So there was no foreign connection. But he was found guilty of violating FARA and interstate stalking. And John and Amanda, you know, after President Trump, when you're dealing with the court system, the amount of effort they do gymnastics to keep exculpatory evidence out of these trials. No one testified against my husband. The case agent didn't testify. The alleged victims couldn't identify him in court because a fairy tale was told to the jury, to the judge. And you sit there every day thinking, how is this America? But the FBI in Newark, over their 4-year investigation on this case, they never spoke to my husband, the 2 NYPD retired detectives, the 2 federal agents that were touched this case, but they did speak to the CCP agents, the actual people who did these things were in another, doing something totally separate for years, and they never spoke to U.S. law enforcement about this case to learn. It was shocking to me, the amount of perjury that went on and gymnastics and fairy tales. That's the only way I could explain it. And I'm still to this day shocked, having been in law enforcement with my husband and our relatives and friends and family, like, how in the world could you take an innocent man, a hero like my husband, and create a case against him for the W, And President Trump went through the same thing, suppressing evidence, not letting him put witnesses on, creating a case out of nothing. I mean, my husband did nothing illegal, nothing, absolutely nothing. So, when I see President Trump going through this, I'm like in tears almost, like this, he understands. He knows this happens, the weaponization. And John, when you get false search warrants and my family with falsified information and you're spying on my family, I mean, you have no probable cause. You're spying for years, following us, went through 10 years of our banking records, my children. How can the FBI totally put my family in danger, not protect us, and then continue to monitor us for years? And I wish I was wrong. I wish we wouldn't have to fight this and continue to fight this. I mean, my husband's supposed to report to prison in 2 weeks, federal prison. They gave him 18 months, the judge, 18 months for doing his job as a private investigator. Terrible.
Martha, we only got about a minute left. What is next? Is there a pardon request in? Is Congress getting involved? I know I'm looking forward to reading your book because it's going to be meticulously researched, but what's the next step? We got about a minute left.
We have put in a pardon request for the President of the United States, Mr. President Donald Trump. I know him. I know if he knows that an NYPD hero was sacrificed, who's given everything, his body, his mind, his heart to service. I know he would embrace him and say, I've been there. I get what you've been through, but we don't do this to heroes in this country. We don't sacrifice heroes for our greatest enemy, China. So we put the request in, we're praying every single day. And I believe that once he hears the facts of this case, it will be an absolute done deal. But we're running out of time. We only have till June 16th until he has to report. So if he's listening and praying, we are going to continue to do that. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Martha Byrne and everybody, go check out the book. Again, it is called In the Interest of Justice. Martha, great to see you again. Hoping to hear some really great updates in the next few weeks.
Let's have some joy soon. But yeah, the book comes out June 5th, and I hope you read it and you see what really happens. It's all in there. All the truth is in there about what happened to our family, because it could happen to anybody. If it could happen to me, if it could happen to my husband, who's never done anything wrong in his life, and
if it can happen to the President of the United States.
You.
Absolutely. Martha Byrne, thank you so much, everybody. Go check out that book. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back on the other side. Welcome back, everybody. If you were tracking President Trump's travel to the Gulf states as he went to Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE, you know that near the conclusion of that was an interesting plot twist when Iran called UNC. I wouldn't say they called full uncle, but they called UNC and indicated that they were ready to come to the table when it comes to a nuclear deal. So joining us now to talk about that is the Deputy Director of the Washington office of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. He's also the author of The Iran Threat, Ali Reza Jafarzadeh. Ali Reza, great to see you.
Great to see you, Amanda. and also John.
Yes, sir.
It's good to see him too, isn't it? Ali Reza, the Secretary of State said this over the weekend, and President Trump just truthed it out as we were coming to air, that uranium enrichment is completely off the table when it comes to this deal. What else does President Trump want to see in there? What do you want to see in it?
Well, I think it's so important to stick to the point that this regime, given the track record and the history of decades of lie and deception and moving a nuclear weapons program, not a nuclear energy program, is so important to call for the dismantlement of all of the nuclear sites of Iran. And obviously that includes zero enrichment. But also you need to understand that this regime is so weak. They have been at the negotiating table before, but they have never been so weak. They have lost much of their clout in the region. Their biggest ally, Assad, is gone. Their proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and a number of others have been basically decimated. Inside Iran, the people are opposed to the regime, and there have been rounds of major uprisings in the country. This is a new reality of Iran, and I think under these circumstances, this is the time to hold the regime accountable and make them deliver.
Yeah, you mentioned the weakness of the regime, and I think we're seeing more and more signs of that over the last few days. Some trucker strikes, just open resistance to the government. We saw the earlier waves of the women protesters. People in Iran are more emboldened than ever to express their dissatisfaction with the ruling government, correct?
Absolutely. You mentioned, John, the truck drivers. There are tens of thousands of truck drivers who are on strike in all 31 provinces of the country. They're fed up. And this is not the only sector of the society. You have other, workers, people who are involved in the, making bread, people involved in agriculture, students. They have been on strike. And this regime is in trouble because the economy is in shambles. The currency has lost about half of its value since last year. And the regime finds no other solution other than the stepping up executions in Iran. Since Pezeshkian took office as the new president of the regime last August, about 1,300 prisoners, including women and including political prisoners, have been executed by the Iran regime. This is a sign of absolute weakness of the regime, and that's why the resistance is on the rise. Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, the president-elect of the Iranian resistance, she was actually endorsed by a House majority in HRES 166 that called for endorsing her 10-point platform. But she also appeared before a House hearing via satellite from Paris. She said there's no need for boots on the ground or appropriation of money. All the West need to do is to recognize the right of the people of Iran, who have both the capability and intent to bring down the mullahs. You need to recognize the right to confront the Revolutionary Guards. That's where the focus should be, not just only on the nuclear issue, but also see the other aspects of the weakness of the regime and also the potential for change as the only viable end to the nuclear and terror threat of the Iran regime.
Yeah, so well said.
Ali Reza, we've only got about 45 seconds left, but I don't want to get ahead of my skis here, but let's say pen hits pad, negotiations are successful, the deal goes through. Should the United States be sending their own inspection agents in? There are a lot of other countries that I think are interested parties who are going to want to make sure that there's compliance as well. How will that look?
I think the only successful deal would be a deal that would lead to the closure of all the nuclear sites of Iran, and the role of the International Atomic Energy Agency plus the U.S. inspectors should be to oversee the closure of all of the sites in Iran, because they're all involved and are part and parcel of a nuclear weapons program which needs to end.
Yeah, huge.
Ali Reza Jafarzadeh, always a pleasure to have you here, sir. We'll have you back on again very soon, hopefully, as these negotiations go forward and are successful, and we can get an update from you.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Likewise. John, great show. I hate the subject matter that we had to start with because I feel like there's a bit of a trend, and I don't want to see it go that way.
I know. We have to keep highlighting it, though. We have to shout out this hatred to start to shame it to its end.
Yep. Shaming it. It's the
Terrible.
only way to do it. Everybody head over to justthenews.com. Lots of great reporting, especially John's article there on the FBI and COVID. Check it out, and then we will be back here tomorrow night at 6.